Hello, everyone. My name is George Shea from Demonstrated Success. I have had the good fortune of working with many Vermont educators over the past several months as part of a data use and effective teaming initiative that's been going on throughout the state. And we're excited to have you here for the first of four uh, PLC webinar series, a quadrilogy, a tetralogy, I believe is what they're called. There's your word for the day. Um, and we're going to just move right into it. So, Heather, if you want to advance, I want to thank the Vermont AOE for sponsoring us and all their support of this work through the year. And they really are thoughtful about what Vermont educators need and providing professional learning opportunities to suit those needs. Just so you know, if you have questions, enter them into the Q&A section on your Zoom screen, and our facilitators will get to that. You'll be muted during the conversation. This is webinar mode in Zoom. We'll have all the resources posted on the Vermont Data Use page of our website, which we'll show you later at the end. There'll be a brief survey at the end. This is the first of four in a series. So we'd appreciate any feedback that can help inform any changes we might want to make for our future um, webinars. So, and there's a link to a PD certificate at the end that you'll see. Um, so this is just a quick profile of our data initiative with Vermont that came as a result of needs from educators expressed by educators to have more data literacy and data response work and effective teaming and systemic data response support. And been a lot of learning opportunities starting in August, and we're going throughout the year. We have a course through Vermont State University, and we've had a lot of in-person workshops and trainings on PLCs, effective data use, and it's been across the state and virtual through August of 2024. So thank you, AOE, and for your support. And we have a website which outlines all of our work. If you go to www.demonstratedsuccess.com, under resources, it'll say Vermont Data Use, which lists all of our upcoming professional learning opportunities, as well as all the resources that have stemmed from this work so far. So thank you, Heather. And let's see, we're moving back into it. Again, here's the calendar of learning opportunities. We have an assessment literacy workshop coming up in South Burlington. Next, a 2-day that should be great. This is the first of four-part PLCs webinar series and strategic planning going on in South Burlington, Goshen, and Manchester. We also provide in-school support, coaching, data coaching, working on systems that schools are developing and support for data use and forming effective professional learning teams. So we appreciate you can reach out to us. All of our information is at the end. I think I'm actually going to pass it off to two of our facilitators in a second. Especially pleased to introduce my colleagues, Heather Jenkins and Marissa Hooper. They've done a lot of work on professional learning community training and development in schools across New Hampshire and now some Vermont. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Heather and Marissa. Take it away, you guys.
All right. Thanks so much, George. I'm Heather Jenkins. I will be one of your presenters today. I am the Director of Assessment and Math Curriculum here at Demonstrated Success, and I work a lot on the PLC initiative. In addition, we have Marissa Hooper, who's my colleague.
Hi, everyone. I am Marissa Hooper. I am a school support and math specialist here at DS and happy to be with you today.
All right. Right now, we'll turn off our cameras so that everybody can have as much room on their screen as possible. Just some key understandings for you to know about for this PLC series. When we talk about doing the webinars as a series, it would be great if people could make all of the webinars so that you could gain all of the information. This is what we have for targets on all of them. We know that not everybody can make every single webinar, but we'll have a little bit of a snapshot and a review in the beginning of them to say this is what's been done so far, and then we'll move on to the next one. But overall, we're going to really make sure that you're understanding the highly functioning professional learning communities and what you can do to not only support student learning, but your own learning. Another target that we have for this series is to make sure that you understand the process as an educator or even as an administrator in the professional learning community cycles of PLC, and then to help you implement consistent systems to make sure that you have highly functional professional learning communities. So we have a lot of protocols and a lot of different documentation that we're going to be sharing with you today and throughout this series to be able to help you with that. For today's webinar, so for this first webinar, our targets are talking about what it takes to have highly functional teams in your buildings or in your districts. We're going to define what a professional learning community is or a PLC is, and then we're going to give you a little bit of information about the best practices and how you can get started with some of these routines in your schools or your districts. Just a heads up for the other PLC series, we wanted to make sure you had all of the dates here. You can mark them down. Again, these resources will be available to you. They'll be right up on our website. So you'll have this whole presentation with all the information in it. There's a couple of quite a few links in it as well. So you'll have all of the information there. So first and foremost, we want to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to what the definition of PLC is. So this particular graphic is basically the life of anybody that works in education right now, right? We want to make sure that we have all students learning. We have a lot of things on our plate. Are we collaborating? Are we looking at data? Do we have time? We have a lot of things to be doing. So I want to kind of sift through that and just make sure you understand what we're talking about with professional learning communities. Anytime we talk PLC, there are three different big ideas of PLC, and that's to ensure that students learn, creating a culture of collaboration, and focusing on results. So first and foremost, that ensuring that students learn. This quote here is really just telling us what we hopefully already know, in that we're not just required to teach it, but we want to make sure that students are learning it. Right? Sort of gone are the days where we just say, oh yeah, I taught it, we're moving on. We want to make sure that students are learning it as well. So that's one of the key focuses of working in professional learning communities. The next one is creating that culture of collaboration. So this is making sure and having a systematic approach to having teachers work interdependently. To be able to analyze student understanding, student work, data, look at the impact of what their professional practices are, and again, all to improve student learning. If you are still staying in your silos and you're trying to do a lot of these things, you will not be as successful. That collaboration is a huge piece of this. Continuing on with that is this notion of it's not just my students in my class, it's that the students are the responsibility of the entire school community. So if I teach fourth grade, it's not just the students in my classroom in fourth grade, it's all the fourth grade students and all the students that I may have any sort of contact or be able to help in any way. The second one here is the notion of our colleagues are really invaluable for us in our opportunities for professional growth. So we want to make sure that we are working with our colleagues in any way possible to be able to grow in our professional lives here. And as educators, right? There's so many educators that we talk to out there that can't remember the last time they were able to go into a classroom and observe another peer. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we talk about PLCs as well. And then just the idea that when all team members contribute, the quality of our work is better. Working smarter, not harder. The next one is focusing on results. So a lot of times we have a notion of where our students are at. As educators, we're really good at having that, sort of information in our heads, but we're really looking at those results that are more data driven. They're down on paper. We want to use that to be able to help inform our instruction and to continue to help us improve student understanding and what our students are able to show and be able to put forth into new and different scenarios. So again, we're talking results, we're talking data, and we're going to measure it and celebrate it. The driving questions of PLC, there are 4 of them that we have here. It's what do we want our students to learn? We need to know this, right? How will we know if they have learned it? What will we do if they haven't learned it? And what will we do if they have learned it? So anytime we're talking about professional learning communities, we are specifically talking about student understanding and making sure that students are able to apply what they have learned in our classrooms to other situations. When we think about PLC, we have created this graphic that is a year-long roadmap for what you would do within your whole year when it comes to professional learning communities or looking at data in any ways or having your teaming. So the first thing you do is you establish your teams. Then you might create a year-long goal. You will have cycle goals within that. Typically, you have 3 different cycles, instructional cycles within a school year. It varies depending on your school or district. And then at the end, you're going to take a peek at how you've done throughout the year. The big thing that is going to be the focus, and we're not going to talk a lot about creating the goals and SMART goals during this particular webinar. That'll be one of our next ones. But the premise is that if we're going to be creating goals and we're going to try to improve student learning, that we're going to look at those goals consistently throughout the year. We're not just going to create it, then maybe look at it in the middle of the year and say, oh, okay, I guess we're doing all right. And then look at it again at the end and just hope for the best. So all of these practices are going to help us start to hone in and understand what we can do specifically in our classroom to improve student learning. This is a graphic that kind of talks about that whole school community and that collaboration that we were talking about, where the students are the responsibility of the collective whole of a school or district rather than just a specific teacher. So this is just that graphic that shows we're looking not just horizontally for your grade level teams, but also vertically and thinking about shared purpose, shared vision, collective commitments, and shared goals for all of those folks in the community. Again, this is sort of that notion of if I teach 7th grade math and I have a special ed student, I need to know where that student is academically, and I don't necessarily use they're special ed, so go ask them. We're really working all together to figure out how we can make a difference. These are some graphics about the progression of growth that you can potentially make when you use a lot of those systematic approaches and some of the protocols and teachings of PLC. This just happens to be a specific school that they were looking at their test results over time. And all of these particular graphics are showing that as teachers are really looking at those principles of PLC and collaborating and working together, there's no sort of gray area. Your students are going to improve. So this is just a general understanding of where data would go. And this is real test data that was for a state assessment for a school here. And so just to kind of recap everything that is sort of building our understanding of PLCs, we thought that this particular, sort of statement here kind of brings it in a nutshell. So we're looking at it's ongoing. Educators are working collaboratively. We have multiple cycles of inquiry and action, depending on what the data looks like, to be able to achieve better results for students. Just pause there and just make sure there aren't any questions. I'll continue going. So the next part of this, when we start to think about PLCs, creating effective teams is essential to be able to make sure that you are having productive PLCs. So again, here's that roadmap. We're just looking at the establishing teams right now and starting with that. So looking at a team, again, they're people, they're working interdependently, and they have a common goal and are mutually accountable. When we talk about effective teams and anything we do about student learning, we cannot ever do it without talking about John Hattie. You might have already heard a lot of information about him. He's done thousands of studies about the influences and what are really the indicators for student learning. And his whole sort of goal was to say, if you have a year's worth of work, you want a year's worth of growth. So he took all of these different indicators and he created, this is called the Hattie effect. So as we look at this graphic here, these things in the red are things that are reverse effects on student learning. So any of these things will actually bring kids backwards. These we're starting to kind of make a little bit of growth on. These are what teachers are able to do with, like homework or, having, administrators reducing class size. So those have an okay effect on student learning. But as we go across here, this is that zone of desired effects. And as you go all the way to the bottom, this is 1.6 means this. If you have collective teacher efficacy, it is the #1 indicator of student success in school. And that is a 1.6 years worth of growth if you do this really well. And what that means is that all the teachers are working together. The big thing here, and we put it in italics, some of the words that were really important, is that challenging expectation of what a year's worth of growth and input should be. And then we have that evidence, which is the data. So one of the things that we're noticing as we're working with schools is that challenging expectations, in some cases, we have lowered the expectations for what we want students to be able to do at a particular grade level because our thought is they're coming in lower, so we have to lower our expectations. And that's the last thing we want to do. We want to know where students are at, which is why we're going to be looking at data, but we want to keep those expectations high. And if we have all those teachers working together and collaborating and learning from one another, that's where you're going to get the most amount of sort of improvement in student learning. So for possible teaming structures, we have a lot of people ask because they say, well, what do teams look like? And it depends on your school. So sometimes you have grade level teams and those are just educators, or you might also have anybody that is a specialist or in special ed or Title I. And, if you have ELL in your school, those grade level teams might include those folks. In other schools, particularly middle school and high school, you tend to have content area teams. So it's educators who teach the same content. So you might have a math team, an ELA team, you might have a civics or social studies team, science team. So they could also be a content area team. The vertical teams, some of the content area teams may be vertical because you might have, let's say, if we're using middle school as an example, a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math teachers working together. But also, you might have those vertical teams from your elementary schools as well. And your elementary teachers might be picking a specific subject area that they would be on a vertical team for, to be able to discuss how things are going with, again, like math, science, ELA. Other PLC teams would be school or district teams. You might have a school or district data team, and those have folks that are administrators or educators, and they would be maybe looking at data in a school or district capacity. Then there is interdisciplinary teams. These might be like your sixth grade team in a middle school. You might have all the different disciplines, and you'll be working and talking about what the data looks like for your students across the sixth grade and across the disciplines. In general, there are 5 components of successful teams, and we're just going to run through these and make sure you understand what each one of these means. So it's just a quick snapshot. All of these here, like you can see my little, when I point here, it's got the little hand. This is linked to our document that is the Creating Effective Teams document. So you can look at that as well. It's going to have a lot of information in there because we're just kind of doing a snapshot here. The first thing that I want to talk about here are agreements, roles, and climate. So defined agreements, this is like when you might create norms or your team agreements to be able to ensure that you are building sort of that positive culture and climate. So whenever we talk about agreements, if you're confused about what that is, it's we can create norms as well for our groups. These agreements will help folks stay active and engaged. So you might have norms that are begin and end on time. It might be there needs to be an agenda. It might be no sidebar, whatever it is for your particular agreements. And roles are super helpful as well to have people continue to be engaged. When people have something that they are doing within a team, it increases engagement. Any agreements or norms should be reviewed at the start of each meeting. Whenever teams create these, it is really specific to that team. It is not something that I would recommend an administrator say, these are going to be the norms for all of our teams this year, because it really is specific to a particular team. I've worked on teams that do really well with no sidebar. So we haven't needed a norm to say no sidebar conversations. But I've needed norms that say we need to stay on track or have everybody be able to contribute within a meeting, because you have those folks that tend to really take the conversation and sort of manipulate the time of the conversation for themselves. So basically, these agreements are reviewed at the beginning of each meeting. And the roles that we have, we're going to talk a little bit about them. I'm going to go show you a couple of sheets here. The roles that people have can either be static, which means they stay the same, or you can rotate roles within the particular team. If you're starting out, I would recommend keeping the roles static, because it gets a little confusing to say, well, this person is the note taker today, this person's the next time, or here's the facilitator today. It's nice to get into a little bit of a groove first. So this is the creating agreements protocol. And all this does is it brings you through some steps to create those particular agreements that will help your teams be able to be most successful. So this is one of the protocols that we have here. And then here's some examples that we have for agreements of collaborative work. We're looking at, we all share responsibility for making our team productive, and all the things that you might be able to do for that. So these are just examples that you might be able to use to be able to have, to give your teams to say, if you're having trouble thinking about this, which of these on here might you put onto your working agreements to help your particular team be as successful as possible? So this is just another example. And then we also have a place for you to be able to put down your team agreements so that they can, it's basically just a Google Doc where you can put them all in there. Again, it's a fluid document if you find that you need to add one of your agreements because something has come up or maybe team members have changed. You always want to review those things as your folks change within your team. But this is just a place where you can put all that information down. We also have, I'll show you in a couple minutes, a note-taking template that you can put all of them on your note-taking template so that it's all in one place. For roles and responsibilities, when we're creating, figuring out who the roles are here, again, these are just suggestions of what you might have for a particular role within your teams. So we have the facilitator, and you can see all the description of what a facilitator might do. You have a note taker, artifacts manager, timekeeper, a process observer, and we have a foodie on here. As educators, we always like snacks. So your team may or may not have one of those, but again, what ends up happening is naturally people choose roles that they're feeling the most comfortable with. And so it may be that, some people might, if you have a lot of people on your team, you might have co-facilitators, or you might have note takers that, 1 week somebody does it and another week somebody else takes the notes. But again, these are just really good ways to have people making sure that they are have some sort of stake in what's going on in the team meetings and have a role within the team as well. Consistent protocols. We find professional learning communities and PLCs, you need some sort of protocols to be able to make sure that folks know what to expect and they sort of know the drill, especially in the beginning. So why we use protocols really help us remain outcome oriented and efficient in our work. For those folks who really need to know exactly what's going on at and what to really be able to know what's going to be happening in their meetings, these create a predictable atmosphere for those folks, and it can create a level of trust. We know we're going to follow these protocols. This is what we're doing. So it makes it a little bit safer for some folks to be able to be part of a team. They also make sure that we're comprehensive and rigorous in what we are doing within our PLCs, and they keep us accountable for pursuing our goals. I know that as educators, we hear the word accountability, and it kind of is like, oh, I know we're all accountable. We feel we're accountable for everything. But really, this just also makes sure that if I'm supposed to be doing something, I know that I'm supposed to be doing it, and it's not a mystery. So we're making that really clear. One of the protocols that we have as well here is a data-driven dialogue protocol. We're not going to go through this all that much today. You're going to see it again in some of the slides here, but we are going to do an actual, one of our PLC workshop webinars is going to be on this particular data-driven dialogue. But this is one of the protocols we have. In addition, we have a PLC team assessment rubric. So as you're starting to set up your PLCs, this is one of those rubrics and documents that you might be able to use at maybe the beginning of the year and maybe the middle of the year and at the end of the year, or multiple times, to say, here's where we are with creating our team agreements or our learning targets or common data or what have you. And then this is where we need to go to be able to be even better at it. So this can help as well. This is just one of those protocols that we have. The next is shared measurable goals. PLC doesn't really work without some sort of articulated or measurable goal. So the measurable goals will help us with follow through and effectiveness. It helps us with having each one of our teams prove sort of what they're doing is working, and be able to ensure that we're doing everything we can to improve that student learning. It gives the team a purpose. And it's not that it's, a rigid goal. It can be revised or modified, but creating those goals is helpful for us to figure out, okay, this is what we're going to be doing during these meetings, and helps sort of drive those meetings throughout the year. When we have a goal, we have action items. And so those action items will be spelled out, and they will be measurable, and sort of consistent throughout the year. We're going to make sure that our goals are meaningful, challenging, and achievable. That's the biggie. We don't want to go so far that we're not able to achieve them, not just from a student understanding standpoint, but maybe even a resource standpoint. Maybe we just don't have that capacity at this point, so we want to just make sure it's achievable. And anytime we create goals, we want to make sure that we review them frequently and we celebrate. Celebrating has been something that very few people are doing right now, I feel like, when it comes to education, and every little bit of progress should be celebrated. So I just want to shout out to any progress that we're making at all. Some of the information that we have about goals, we have a year-long goal template. We'll talk more in detail about that during another webinar. This is a how to create SMART goals worksheet. These are just, again, in creating effective teams, you want to have goals there. And then we'll talk a little bit more in depth about this in another one as well, but this is the year-long action steps and goals. And so this can help us figure out what we're going to be doing throughout the year. And it's something that we'll be able to look at any time to see where we're at with our goals. Accountability is the next one. So the accountability process, right? So if we're looking at a building or a district, we need leadership to be able to have team success, right? We can try to do PLCs on our own. I definitely worked with a grade level where we really tried hard to work on PLC even without our administrators, but it's challenging. So administrators need to be they need to be on board, they need to be supportive, and they need to be part of this process as well. So this is in addition to that, they're looking at teams. They want to make sure that we can take a look at everything that's going on within the school and integrate that work into the larger infrastructure, either within the school or the district. Those building or district leaders should attend the educator meetings at least periodically. We'll talk about that note-taking template coming up in just a little bit. That might be a way to be able to make sure that information is transferred as well. This is that any sort of notes and artifacts should be uploaded so that anybody who either wasn't at the PLC or isn't part of that team that needs to know the information can get to it. And then we have some note-taking protocols that will capture the goals, action steps, and any sort of accomplishments or obstacles as well. This is a PLC cycle checklist. We're going to talk about the PLC cycle coming up here. Marissa's going to talk about it. So this is one of those ways that we can show what we've been doing and how we've been accountable. This note-taking template is, I feel like, essential to any PLC, because this is what has everything that you're doing related to PLC on it. You can see here, it's got your members and what their roles currently are, what your team agreements are, any important documents that you need to have access to. You can put links in here or other links. And then these are all the meeting notes and agenda items that are going on. This just helps you maintain that sort of shared communication with everybody. So we want to make sure that you have a place to do that. So the team notes can be a good place for that. Define timelines. So when we talk about PLC, we want to have specific timelines for work completion. I know so many times when you're looking at data, in your buildings, or you say, okay, we're gonna do a data dive, and we've got this data, and you go in, and then people come in and their data hasn't been entered into a spreadsheet, or they spread all their papers out on the table and say, I'm so sorry, I haven't totally finished correcting these. And so then you bump it back and you say, okay, well, we'll do this next week, and we'll do this next week and next week. And then 3 weeks go by and it's still not done. So having defined timelines is really important. We want those to be created basically throughout the year. So this is, and it's not that they need to stay rigid, but if you need to stay in the ballpark when it comes to timing on that. You can have a shared calendar that can be super helpful. The information should be public. Anybody should be able to see, that needs to see what's going on. There should be no question of like, oh, I didn't know we had a meeting today. Yep. Oh, I didn't know what it was going to be about. Well, we have a calendar and we've got the information on our notes and all of that. So these can be super helpful. And it just helps you make the most of it, any meeting, and make sure that everybody knows what tasks are going to be done. So a clear communication plan. We know that the staff is going to be able to work collaboratively to meet those goals. It is really a working document, always taking a peek at it, making sure that you're all on schedule and know what needs to be done. And then you want to make sure that any activities that your team members need to be aware of are on that calendar. And then making sure that everything that you need to know is put on there, and that people are dedicated to make sure that this is, they're all working towards a common goal. Again, the note-taking template is going to be huge. This is just an example of a shared calendar. It's a Google Calendar. We had weekly PLC meetings here, and then just some general information about what teams might be doing in between. We don't always look at data. Sometimes people look at professional learning communities, and since it's data driven, they think this is a specific data point, and the only time we meet is to look at the data. You might have a larger group of people looking at that data, but in between, your teams are also working and collaborating on what they're doing for instruction and reflecting on goals, and maybe looking at formative data throughout. So this is just an example of what a calendar might look like. This is what leadership can do to make PLCs effective. So we're looking at modeling the collective responsibility and ensuring that they are also talking about student well-being. They can help coach educators as they're trying to meet their goals, that growth mindset, and really risk-taking. I feel like we've kind of gotten a little bit away from the risk-taking and saying, we're going to do what we can. We're going to try something new to be able to improve. That accountability piece, they need to be modeling that as well. This is the hard one for a lot of schools, is protect the time and resources for what works best for students. So we're still working on a lot of schools being able to have that common PLC or planning time, and ensuring that their schedule has that in place. And basically, leadership can talk about how they use data to show growth. For teaching teams, we want to be able to use a wide variety of data, and we want to make sure that we are sharing and prioritizing our shared student learning goals. We want to make sure those learning outcomes are articulated, not just for us, but also for our students. We want to take a look and try different things, look at research supported practices, and help improve student outcomes. There's definitely something to be said for understanding how different people teach and how you might be able to explain things differently. So you want to make sure to tap into your colleagues for that. We want to make sure we're communicating our success and unsuccessful strategies, right? It's okay. You tried it. Maybe something isn't working. Maybe you're looking at your data and somebody else is looking at theirs and theirs looks better. And you say, what are you doing? What can I do? How can I change my approach to this? We want to make sure we're opening up our classrooms, closing the door and being in our silos or in our room on our own is not working. We want to make sure that we're really collaborating and working with our peers. I always say here, this one, I do model lessons sometimes for people. And my biggest thing that I say is a model lesson is not a perfect lesson. So opening our classrooms doesn't mean that you have to have this completely rock star dialed in. We're going to be doing all sorts of craziness during this particular lesson, but just opening it up and saying, this is what I do. And, you know, maybe you've got some strategies that can help people. We're going to hold other people accountable for supporting students. We're not going to say, okay, well, one of our team members refuses to do this. That's not acceptable. We're going to continue working forward and hold them accountable as well. And then protect that team time and use it effectively. You want to make sure that when you get into that room, you have maybe a few minutes to just kind of, talk about what's going on in the day, but it's not a whole day about what happened at recess and how annoying it was, or what's going on with a particular student that you had to send to the office or that put their head down on their desk and wouldn't do anything. We want to make sure that we're helping as many students as possible. It's not that we're not helping the student that put their head down on their desk, but we just want to make sure that we're really creating that culture of helping as many students as possible. Again, acknowledge and celebrate successes. Any questions about teaming before we move on? I'll just kind of pause for a second, and then we're going to look at the PLC cycle. If you have anything for teaming, definitely just put it in the chat, and I'm going to pass this over now to my colleague, Marissa.
So we have this year-long roadmap that we really use to figure out this year-long work with our PLCs. So we've established teams. Like Heather said, we're going to go into this year-long data dive, create a goal and all that next week, in our next webinar. What we're going to focus on right now is just this instructional cycle. So a lot of times, whether you've tried to implement PLCs or when you do, the biggest questions we get are, we've done all this beginning of the year work. Now, what do we do during these cycles in order to meet these goals? So the first thing we want to do is really make sure that we continue that highly effective core instruction. So really what we're talking about here is tier one. We want to connect with students, connect with our colleagues, collaborate, make sure we're activating prior knowledge, demonstrating all this. And we want to make sure that, when we talk about these goals, we're really talking about what all kids need. So we're talking about tier one here when we want to make sure we're continuing our core instruction. And what this represents here is what we're doing during our core instruction that kind of ties to those 4 essential questions of what defines PLC. So we have, what do we want our students to learn? Really what we're doing here is making sure that we are establishing our learning objectives. So we are creating success criteria for our students. We are making learning objectives or learning targets, whatever you call them in your school. We want to make sure we're really unpacking those standards so that we know what our students really need to learn, and they do as well. And once we've done that, we're addressing the question of how will we know when they have learned it? We need to figure out, what either end of unit or common formative assessments, maybe we have them already, maybe we need to create them. But really, what's going to let us know what our students know, what they need to continue working on, and whatnot. And we're going to instruct and assess our students. So we're going to design and review our lessons that we've maybe implemented, that we know what's working, what's not working, and we want to deliver effective tier 1 instruction. And we'll assess our students with those assessments that we've made to determine if they've learned it or not. And these bottom 2 sections, really, we colored them both orange because they kind of go hand in hand with one another. In our classrooms, sometimes, we get the majority of students who know it, and maybe the majority of students, they don't know it. But sometimes we have students who haven't learned it, and we have students who have. And kind of what do we do with them? So when students haven't learned it yet, based on that assessment, we definitely want to interpret and plan intervention. So we want to examine their work. What are they missing? Why didn't they get this particular concept? What misconceptions do they have? And we want to adjust our lessons and instruction. So when we reteach, we need to make sure we're reteaching it differently. They didn't understand it the first time in the way we represented whatever particular concept that we were teaching. So we need to figure out another way to teach our students. And so we want to continue delivering that effective instruction and assess them and ensure that they are grasping these concepts. And then we have those students who have learned it. And we need to really examine their work as well, because we need to make sure we're pushing them forward as well, and that they're also making growth. So we're going to continue analyzing their data and how they're doing. We can move on to a deeper level concept or extend and plan for our next steps. So for this PLC cycle, we're going to start with that highly effective research-based core instruction. We want to make sure that we are in our tier 1 classrooms. And as Heather stated earlier as well, is keeping our expectations high yet achievable. So we want to make sure we're continuing that. We need to identify students who are and are not exceeding in our tier 1 instruction, and what we're going to do, whichever kind of end they're on. We need to either provide those students who need more time and support until they master our essential learning targets or learning objectives. And then those students who have learned it, we need to make sure we're extending for them. And all of this in this instructional cycle, the big thing we want to put out here, and this was one of our PLC series key understandings, is this peer collaboration that we are learning as well as educators. And this is all our peer collaboration. So in our PLC meetings, we're doing this together, talking about what's working, what's not, looking at data, which we're going to go into now. So in this cycle, we have our cycle steps checklist. This is linked as well, but this kind of walks you through what you're going to be doing during this cycle. So, and we're going to take you through each one of these right now. So the first is this note-taking template. We have this here because in our meetings and in this checklist, it is super important that we are documenting everything and sharing it with our colleagues, with administration, that it's always documented. So all of this is taking part here. Next, we want to, so each cycle has this goal that we're meeting. And this initial assessment information template, what this is we are going to determine an initial assessment that's going to let us know where our students are at currently and what we need, what information we need to know about how to get them to meet whichever goal we have for the cycle. So as an example, these initial assessments are really what student data do we need to collect to determine where we're going. So some examples could be, you may have one already or create a pre-assessment that's going to determine what information you need to know. And when creating these, also making sure that you are asking questions that you can use to help you. Either identify common misconceptions that students are having, whether or not they need to extend. So asking particular questions that help you. It could be a post-assessment from a previous cycle that kind of feeds right into where you're going, because again, these can be for any PLC instructional cycle. An in-class formative assessment could help you, as well as maybe student work you're doing, a writing sample. So once you administer the initial assessment, or whatever you're choosing for that initial assessment, what we're going to be doing with that is this data dive. And we are going to go into that in our next PLC series. But this really helps us observe and interpret the data from our students. And really what it moves to is this phase 4, which is considering implications for practice. This data is going to help us determine what to do next in our classrooms to help our students meet our goals. That brings us to this cycle planning. So what this really is here is a focus on our tier 1. Maybe it's groupings. What strategies and activities are we going to plan to ensure students are getting what they need to meet these goals for tier 1 instruction, also reteaching strategies, and how we're going to progress monitor our students. And then also allows us to also think of some strategies for our tier 2 and tier 3 instruction for those kids who maybe need a little bit more than just the time that we have in our tier 1 core instruction. And then after we've done this highly effective core instruction, we have determined how we'll know when students meet it. We've retaught, we've extended for students. We are going to post-assess, and we are going to see if students learned the intended goal or target of standards that we had. And with this post-assessment, we are going to do another data dive, like I said, to see where our students are at and if they met the goal or not. And then we're going to have this cycle summary. This is really for accountability purposes, to make sure that, we had those shared in our measurable goals. We want to make sure we did what we could to meet them. So what went well? What could we have done differently? And again, no matter what progress we made towards this goal, we want to celebrate it. More best practices that we want to do within our collaborative data-driven teams. And these are what we can do together in our PLC cycle meetings. So when you're meeting weekly or bi-weekly, whatever you have for your meetings, these are some of the things we can be doing to make sure that we are having best practices. So that's identifying your learning targets and really unpacking standards to figure out what students need to know, be able to do, and understand. We can create these common assessments together. We can correct common assessments. We can get this data together to determine where students are at. Reviewing data, right? Constantly formatively assessing our students so we know exactly where they're at and what they need, and reviewing that together. We can determine which students, need that reteaching or need that enrichment, and then when you think you should be moving on. And one of the ones that, I particularly like a lot is being able to share new ideas and planning for instruction with your colleagues. So you can talk about what's working, what's not working, and really getting ideas on how you can help students, and sharing that with your peers. And then that visiting and observing one another's classrooms, having that door open, and seeing, what's working in classrooms and maybe what's not. So last but not least, we just want to talk about getting started with this process. So maybe this is something you've tried to start PLCs, or maybe you want to start next year, or kind of start at the end of this year. is really establishing teams. So if this is our year-long roadmap, here's where we need to start. We need to make sure we have these teams made so that way we can have highly effective and high functioning PLC teams. So here's some first steps that we want you to take. So we want you to think about what you're currently doing for teaming in your schools. Maybe you already have some teams, you know, that's the content level, the vertical grade level. And if you don't, maybe what kinds of teams do you want to create depending on the size of your school, the grade levels in which you teach. And then looking at data within your schools. Are you currently doing anything for that? If you are, kind of what processes are in place, and if you're not, what processes do you need to put in place? So once you have your teams established, whatever that's going to be, like I said, the content area, the vertical teams, it's important to create those working agreements. We have our protocol here that you can follow that can help you create these agreements, and it allows everyone to have input of what they need for a team. So maybe what I need for a team is different than what Heather might need for a team, or George, and we want to make sure that all of our needs are heard. And then just taking in consideration some of the following, which I'll talk about in a minute. And once you have these PLC agreements, we do have a template here that you can fill in. We recommend keeping agreements between 4 to 6. And again, they can you can add to them or maybe remove any as necessary. And you can also keep them on your note-taking template. So when making our agreements, as part of that protocol on the bottom, we just give a little bit of what we want you to take into consideration, which is that timing. When are you meeting and what time? How are you going to encourage listening with your group, especially if it's a new team who maybe haven't worked together before? And confidentiality. So when will the meetings be open, and what will be said during the meeting, and what will be held in confidence, and what can be said after, making sure that we're making everyone feel comfortable that they can talk openly in their meeting. Some decision making. How are we going to make decisions as a group, especially when we maybe aren't agreeing? Participation. We want to make sure that everyone's participating, and we want to make sure everyone has ample speaking time, and what's maybe our attendance policy is. And then some expectations. What we want to make sure that, just like we set for our students, we want to make sure that we set them for each other as well. So these are just some examples, as well as you do have the examples that were linked earlier in the slides, but these are some as well that you can take a look at that might speak to you. And lastly, the roles and responsibilities. We want to make sure that in this group, everyone has a role. And again, like Heather said, these are some that these are some that are a starting point for you, but depending on the team, you can adapt them to make them fit what you need. And making sure that we have a note-taking template started. So you can use the one we've linked as a starting point. You can create your own, but making sure that you have some sort of documentation system in place that allows for that communication, and making sure that you have your dates and times discussions. When are we meeting and what times are we meeting? So this is that note-taking template documentation system that we have for you that you can use. It has all the information that should be documented in a meeting. And then a shared calendar, again, just an example of when meetings are happening, what's happening at those meetings, and so forth. Right here at the end of the slides, we've actually linked our entire binder that when we have PLCs, we want to make sure we store everything in one place that people can find. So we have PDFs of the binder And this has everything in order, in which the year-long roadmap goes, as well as just our philosophy, some graphics, things like that. And then we also have them in Google Doc form, so you can make copies of the documents for yourself or your team and kind of make it as a starting point for you. And if you have any questions or anything at all, please reach out to any of us, and George as well, and we will be happy to hear from you. Thank you so much for coming to our PLC series #1.